Let's pray together. Father, thank you for the privilege and honor it is to gather, and not only to be together as the people of God, but to gather underneath the authority of the Word of God. And God, I pray that you would speak to us today. We are your people, and we are here to hear from you. And so God, we thank you that you gave us your word to tell us about who you are so that we might know you as our Father. So God, I pray that no matter what our story is, no matter what we come in here with today, God, I pray that you would speak to us, open our eyes and our ears to see and to hear, and then to know the great love with which you have for us. And then God, I pray that you would help us, because we can't do that without your Spirit. And as always, God, I pray you'd help me to communicate it in a way that honors you. So we now submit ourselves to you. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we got a long way to go and a short time to get there, baby. All right, so open up your Bibles, Ephesians chapter 5. If you don't know what I meant by that, ask someone over the age of 45, all right? And so Ephesians 5, I'm gonna pick up where we left off last week in verse 6, because as you're gonna see, verse 7 references what was said in verse 6. And so let's read Ephesians 5, verse 6 through 8, and then we'll stop and chat about it. It says, "Let no one deceive you with empty words. For because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience." And so the reference there is to these people, the sons of disobedience, which is why verse 7 says, "Therefore, do not become partners with them." Do not become partners with them. Now listen to this phrase, verse 8. "For at one time, I'm just mixing words together here. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord." So let's stop and chat about that. This is not a misprint or in the translation of words. You know, anytime you take something from one language to another, it's kind of, you kind of get lost in translation. But it says here, you were darkness, not just you practiced darkness. No, you were darkness, and now you are light. If you were here last week and you listened to that message, you know that's a reference to your isness, right? Your isness, who you is. And this is what I think is so important for us to understand, because we just don't typically think like this. We typically think in terms of what we do. Yeah, I do bad things, or I did things in the dark, but I'm not darkness. Well, that's not what the Bible says. No, you do what you are. So the problem is not just we did some things, the problem is we were some things. And this is the essence of what I was trying to say last week when it comes to the terms of your identity. You were darkness. Now, this is a reference all the way back, I say all the way back, it was 2 weeks ago, to Easter, right? Darkness, your hour is over. And I love this, again, because you see this when we were talking about Easter then, what we were saying was darkness, your hour, that's about your power, right? And darkness, and I made the point there that Jesus, right before he died, the whole world went dark, right? And we experienced the eclipse this last week, and it went dark for like a little bit, but this went dark for 3 hours over the entire world. I mean, just imagine how weird that must have felt. And some of you traveled to go see it, and it was awesome for like 3 minutes, right? And it is, I mean, it's fascinating. But this for 3 hours, and I made the point that to me that feels like, again, this was a natural thing that was happening, but it has this kind of metaphorical, supernatural understanding for us that darkness was descending onto Jesus. And that darkness that was descending onto Jesus, yes, on one level, it was all the powers of darkness. It was all the evil in the world. But think about it on another level too. That darkness was the weight of sin and human depravity coming onto Jesus. But let's make it even more personal. That darkness was us coming onto Jesus, because we were darkness. We were darkness. And that's the part that we need to understand. It wasn't just our deeds that came on to Jesus, who we were came on to Jesus. And as I told you, it's not like this was some big epic battle, right? Because Jesus willingly offered himself up. He was substituting himself. Why? Because he is light. We were darkness. So he took on our darkness, but you know this, light defeats darkness. And so what happened here was not just a transformation of our practices, but a transformation of our person. We are now no longer what we were. We were darkness, but now we are light. Let me give you one reference and then I'll give you the main point from this section. Let's go back to Ephesians chapter 3, verse 6, same letter. Ephesians 3, verse 6 is what Paul said. This mystery is that the Gentiles are fellow heirs, members of the same body, and partakers of the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. And so the first 3 chapters of Ephesians, if you were here for that, I told you that the first 3 chapters explain what God did to get us back. This is why I like to say often, just like we talked about last week, God so loved us that he made us. He created us out of love. But then we disobeyed. And when we disobeyed, right, that now separates us from a relationship with God. But God wasn't content on just judging us for that, but also to say, I want you back, and so I'm gonna take the judgment on myself. And so Jesus died, right? Not just to get us to a place, to get us back to a person, right? It's all relational. And now what the Bible says this great mystery is this was never for one people group, simply the Jewish people. It was coming from the Jewish people, but as I've told you many times before, it was not just for the Jewish people, it was for all people. For all people to take part or to partake in the promise. And the promise is, we were darkness, but Jesus took it. And since he took it, we now are light. So it's a transformation of our being. All right, so that's the gospel. I mean, I could almost describe the entire gospel just using the word person, right? Persons were dark, dead. Jesus takes on in his person our darkness to get us back to a person, right? So that's the essence of what Jesus did. Now, this is why Paul is saying in verse 7, do not become partners with the sons of disobedience. Why? Because you're not them anymore. You used to be them, but now you're not them. And this is why I showed you Ephesians 3:6. The word partakers in Ephesians 3:6 is the exact same word as the word partners in Ephesians 5:7. It's the only 2 places in the entire New Testament that the word occurs. Partners and partakers. See, this is the thing. Once I partook, and think about it like this. Think about the Lord's Supper, right? The night that Jesus was betrayed. He took the bread, he took the wine, and they partook of it. See, now when we partake, and we'll do this in May, right? Now when we partake in the bread, when we partake in the wine, it's not about the literal bread or the literal, for us, grape juice, right? It's about partaking in something that is symbolizing what we have partaken in. You with me when I say that, all right? We partake of it to remind us of what we've partaken in. All right, that's the point. This is why Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. This symbolizes my body that was broken. This symbolizes my blood that was shed. So partake of this as a reminder of what you've partaken in so that you'll no longer partake with what you used to partake in. You with me? Which means, let me give you this point. When we partake of the promise, the gospel, it changes our practices and our partners. It changes our practices individually, what we partake in, and watch this, and it changes who we partake in them with. See, the word partner and the word partake, I already told you, same word. So think about it like this. God isn't just saving individual people. Yes, that is true, but he's also saving a people. And when God saved you, he put you into a new people. This is why 1 Peter 2 says, once you weren't a people, but now you are God's chosen people. Once you hadn't received mercy, now you have. So if God saved you, he not just saved you from darkness, but he saved you from not being a part of the people of light. But now you're no longer a people of the darkness. This is why light and dark can't partner with each other. You can't partner. And this is what I want you to see, is when God saved you, he didn't just save you as a person. He now made you a part of a new people. Now you're a part of the people. We love it around here to say, our family. Revolution, our family. This is a family. And if you're new to our family, I want you to know we're still dysfunctional too. Right? We still got some crazy aunts and uncles up in this mug, all right? We're trying, we're working on them, all right? And if you're like, oh, I didn't know that, because it's you, all right? And so we're a people, but this is why it's so important for us to gather, right? Every week, not just in this large gathering, but also in small groups, right? To remind you, this is my people. Why? Because you need people to remind you of what you are to partake in. Because you know the old phrase, show me your friends and I'll show you your what? Future. Show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Probably the scariest thing in the world is the top 5 people you hang around are those that you're gonna become like. So if you don't like them 5, you might need a new 5. Because you're gonna become them. Let's take this a step further. Show me your family, I'll show you your future. Now this is true on a genetic sense, right? Like whatever your family looks like when they get older, that's what you're gonna look like. And I was laughing about this because my son, who's 20 years old, and he's much more fit at this season of his life than I am. But he's been working out, and I didn't ask him this, but he thought it was funny, and I know he won't mind. But he just did this body fat composition thing, like, you know, they went in and they test all of his lean muscle mass, all this kind of stuff. And again, he has far less body fat than I do. But I thought that would be funny, but I guess, you know. I mean, thank you for, you know, just believing that, but, you know. But his, I mean, far less, I mean, much more lean muscle mass than I do. But here's where we were so similar. He brought it home, he's like, Dad, look at this is hilarious. This is showing Lindsay and I. Like his body fat percentage in his arms and like, even like, you know, in his quads and legs, because, you know, he's got tree trunks. Like those were very low. Almost all of his body fat percentage, and this is what they called it, was in his trunk. It was in his trunk. And he was like, Dad, look at this is hilarious. He's like, I'm just like you. But yeah, baby, because I got junk in the, you said it, I didn't, all right? That's true, because that's a Gerdes trait, right? And this is why my daughter is probably very excited that she's not genetically related. But my son's trunk is like my trunk, and my trunk is like my father's. I mean, it's all quads and backside, baby. I mean, it's just what it is. And so my son knew, because we're family, this is his future. Right? Which is why he does have a coach and he's working out so hard. And why my wife has said to me, hey, I've seen your family. We need a better future. And so what I'm getting at here is this. The same is true, spiritually speaking. If we are just simply focused on what we are partaking in and not who we're partnering with, then we're missing a powerful spiritual principle, which is why any recovery process worth its salt, not just changes practices, but changes partners. You need a partner, you need a community, you need people that are gonna help reinforce practices. That's what he's getting at here. And so he's saying, don't partner with them. Why? Because you don't partake with them anymore. Now, let me go one last verse in Ephesians that we've already done, but I want you to see this. Ephesians 2, 1-5. I love this. And to be honest with you, this is one of the reasons why I love preaching the Bible, because I didn't see it yet. But now reading Ephesians 5 and then reading back into Ephesians 2, I'm like, man, I didn't see this yet, but it's amazing. But look at this, Ephesians 2, 1-5. And you were dead. Do you hear the isness in that? You were, you're being. You could substitute there, you were darkness. You were darkness, you were dead. That's who you were. In the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power. Darkness, your hour is over. I told you, darkness, your power is over. That used to be the power. The spirit that is at work now in the sons of disobedience. Same word in verse 6 of Ephesians 5. Among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, that used to be how we lived, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature. That word there, nature, is the Greek word physis. It's where we get our word physical, all right? Like physical sciences. It's the idea that it was in your bones. This is who we were by nature. Children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. Now, the Bible would have been horrible if it stopped there, but thank God it didn't. Verse 4, I've told you this before, the best two words in the Bible, but God, being rich in mercy. Now listen to this, because of the great love with which he loved us. He didn't just make us, he made us. You're like, what do you mean? Listen, even when we were dead in our trespasses and sins, made us. Made us what? Alive. You could say this, made us light. See, we were dead, made us alive. We were darkness, he made us light. How did he do that? Together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. See, that's what happened when we partook of the promise. Now let's go back to Ephesians 5, verse 8 and 10. So that's what happened. Now what do we do about it? Verse 8 through 10. Walk as children of light. Walk. This is what I said last week. Live as though you're loved. Behave as though you're beloved. Now in parentheses, he says this, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. If it's good, if it's right, if it's true, it's because it came from God. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Now, this is what's really important. Again, think back to last week's message. The reason why we walk as light, because we no longer live as children of the dark. And what were the three things that described that action or those actions? immorality, impurity, idolatry, which was what I was trying to make the point last week of saying, when your identity changes, you are now a child of God, a beloved child of God. You walk in the light. The problem with so many people, though, is their actions become their identity. And they don't just say, I'm a child of light who struggles to walk in the light, but this action that the Bible calls darkness is now my identity. And if darkness is your identity, then biblically speaking, you're a child of darkness, not a child of light. Because what are the descriptors of children of light? The descriptors of children of light are not immorality, impurity, idolatry, but good, right, and true. Good. Good for you, good for humanity. Right or righteous and true. And I love how he says here, fruit. The fruit of light. The word there, fruit, means results or outcomes. So you can tell who someone is by the outcomes of their life, right? You can tell who someone is by what their isness produces. The fruit. This is why we would say, and Jesus would say, you know them by their fruit. You know them by their outcomes. You know them by how they live, how they walk. Because if they're out, and again, I'm not talking about perfection here, but we are talking about patterns though. What is the pattern of their life? Is it good and right and true? Then that's the fruit. Why? Because that's the fruit of light. That's the outcomes. And this is what I want you to see. In verse 10, he says, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Now think about this in the terms of children. Because he just said, walk as children of the light. See, who your father is determines your fruit. Who your father is determines your fruit, the outcomes. And here's how you can determine that. They lead in two different directions. He says, try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. See, if you're a child of God, your main concern in life is going to be, how do I discern and then do what is pleasing to my Father? The word discern means to examine or test or judge. I want to try to determine or figure out, ask, we would say this like in our kind of language, what is his will? What does he want? Because I want to do what is pleasing to him. Now, I know this isn't Father's Day, but fathers, think about how awesome that would be if all your children were like, I want to do what is pleasing to you. You'd be like, I know you love me now. And then I'm not talking about in a weird, twisted way, all right? But what am I getting at here? If you're as we would sing the song, a good father, then what is pleasing to you is gonna be what's most beneficial to them. It's not about your own pleasure, because you would never give them commands that would harm them. You would only give them commands that would be good for them. And so therefore, if they do what's pleasing to you, what is pleasing to you is what is good for them. You see it? And that's what children of light do. But what do children of darkness do? They say, you know what? The ultimate goal of my life is not to please him, but to please me. I'm just trying to discern and do what is pleasing to me. I'm just trying to figure out what makes me happy. And this, again, is the very air we breathe as a culture. And the reason why I want to point that out to you is because you've been lied to, like in verse 6. You've been deceived with empty words. And here's the real thing I want you to see. There's a father behind those lies. There's a father that's behind those lies that tells you if you will do what's pleasing to you, it'll actually be better for you. But he's lying to you. Because the only thing that's going to be better for you is what's pleasing to the Father of light, not the father of lies. Let me give you this point and we'll break it down. As children of light, that's who we are now, right? As children of light, we discern and do what is pleasing to the Father of light and not the father of lies. And I'll show you the verse where that comes from in just a second. But think about this. You can go right back to Genesis chapter 3 and see this play out in human history. Because what happened? The Father, God, right, gives Adam a command. And then for 2 chapters, it was awesome. Chapter 3 shows up. Adam and Eve are together. They have the whole world. They have the garden and they have one tree. And listen, that tree was not bad because God doesn't make anything bad. It was just a command, don't touch that. Do you trust me? And what does the devil do? The devil comes in, right? I said this last week, and he deceives. And here's what I find fascinating. In fact, my first Bible was an NIV Bible, and it's the one I memorized a lot of things and this is what it says. And Eve saw that it was pleasing. She saw that it was pleasing to the eye and was beneficial to making one wise. It was pleasing. So in that moment, what did Eve decide to do? She decided to believe the lie that it was better to please herself than it was to please God. And this is what I'm trying to get you to see. That's always what the father of lies does. So at the end of the day, the real question is, who's your daddy? Who's your dad? Because there's only two. There's only two fathers. The father of light and the father of lies. Let me show you this in John 8:44. You don't have to turn there, you can write it down as a reference. But this is Jesus talking to the Jewish people. Now the Jewish people, and you go back and read this, and we did this in John, in this context, said we're children of Abraham. Abraham's our father. And Jesus says, you're wrong. Listen to this. Verse 44 of John 8. You are of your father, the devil. You are of your father, the devil. And your will, your desire, your want to, is to do your father's desires. You're trying to please your father. No, I'm not. I'm just trying to please myself. Exactly, that's his will. That's his desire. You got that desire from his deception. That's his desire. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar, and here it is, the what? Father of lies. He's the father, which means he's the genesis of lies. Every lie finds its beginning in him. He's a father. Jesus says that's his native tongue. How do you know he's lying? He's talking. That's how you know. Which is why I tell you all the time. When you start thinking things, because here's what the devil does. He just shoots arrows of lies into your brain all the time. And you realize every thought that comes in to your brain, you don't have to entertain. Just because you thought it, just because you thought it doesn't mean you have to tell us. For real, all right? I don't need to know all those thoughts. Which I understand, this is what's awesome about being a dude sometimes, because Lindsay will ask me, what are you thinking about? I'm like, nothing. She's like, you're not thinking about nothing? No, not a thing. But apparently you are, which is why you mentioned something to me. Yeah, I was thinking. And I just braced myself. And not because it's bad, but because the world is the oyster, right? Like this thought could come from any sector of society at this current moment. I have no idea. Okay. Yeah. But every thought that comes in doesn't have to be spoken and it doesn't have to be believed. Which is why we must do exactly what the Father told Adam or asked Adam and Eve. He said, who told you that? Who told you were naked? Who said that to you? See, that right there will help you discern what's pleasing. Who told you that? Who said that to you? Would God say something like that to you? Well, I don't know. Well, Jesus says, my sheep know my voice. So you better know Jesus if you want to know if he would say something like that to you. But this is what we got to see. That's what discernment and doing is about. But here's, I think, probably one of the greatest tests. Is that thought ultimately pleasing to him or pleasing to you? I'm not saying God will always tell you things that are not pleasing to you, because God made things that are good, and following God is pleasing. But if the sole motivation of what you do is pleasure, and you think that pleasure can be found outside of the person of God, then you believed a lie. And this is why it always amazes me when people like, sin's not fun or sin's not pleasurable. Anybody who tells you that doesn't know how to sin well. Sin is pleasing. I said this on Thursday and didn't even mean it to rhyme, but it did. But sin is pleasing for a season. There's pleasure in it, because all sin is to take something God said was good and to pervert it. So it's pleasing, but in how we practice it and in who we partner with, we have to say, was this mostly just pleasing to me? Or can I do it in such a way where it's still pleasing, but it's ultimately about pleasing him? See, that's what we're trying to discern and do. That's what we're trying to figure out. Now let me go one more set of verses, just because I want you to see if Paul and Jesus weren't enough. All right, here's Peter, all right? 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 14 and 19. Listen to what he says. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. You could substitute the word feelings. Whoa, feelings, right? Don't be conformed to the feelings of your former ignorance. What does that mean? Your feelings are ignorant. This is what I felt. Yeah, but feelings are dumb because they just feel. They're not in and of themselves bad because God gave them to you, but you have to submit your feelings to the right Father and say, Father, I'm feeling this, but I want to feel this in a way that's pleasing to you, not out of my former ignorance. I don't want to take this feeling to the wrong father. Then he says, but as he who called you is holy, set apart, this is what we looked at last week, saints, you also be holy in all your conduct. Since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. Now listen to this, verse 17. And if you call on him as Father, there's that word, who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourself with fear throughout the time of your exile, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers. not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. Do you hear this? You know what something is worth by what you're willing to pay for it. And God thought we were worth it to pay for us, not with silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Jesus. Jesus, the Son, thought so much of us as his brothers and sisters and his Father's will that he willingly laid down his life. This is what, again, on Easter, darkness didn't take Jesus' life from him. It wasn't this epic battle. Jesus lays it down willingly. He said that. No one takes it from me. I lay it down because if I lay it down, I've got the power to take it back up again. So he gave his life. This is why I said to get you back to your Father. And when you get that, when you understand that, you will take all that whole bag of feelings and you will submit it to the will of your Father because he's the only Father that loves you. And you will say, Father, what is your will? What's pleasing to you? I want to be an obedient child to you. Why? Because I know my former ways were futile. I know the things that I learned from my earthly father. And again, even if your father is a believer, your earthly father, if he did his job correctly, he would have told you that he wasn't always a believer and he too inherited futile things, and he doesn't want you to inherit those futile things, but the glorious things from his new father. So we all inherited futile. That word is empty. And again, it's not just father in the sense of like it's only men, but it's the idea of parents, your father and your mother. We inherit things from them that are futile, empty. And sadly, a lot of us inherit empty things because they were empty and they didn't have anything to give us. But our Heavenly Father is not empty. He's full of love and grace and mercy, and that's what he has to give us. So that's why we say, Father, what's pleasing to you? That's what I want to discern and do. Now let's go back to Ephesians 5, verse 11. This is why he says, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. Take no part in it. Why? Because it's unfruitful. The outcomes are not fruitful, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. So he says, take no part in it. Here's what is amazing. When Adam and Eve took the fruit, it's because they were thinking about the fruit and they weren't thinking about the fruit. You see what I just did there? They were thinking about the fruit in front of them. They were not thinking about the outcome or the results. And neither do we, right? This is why later on you were like, what was I thinking? You weren't thinking. You were feeling. That was why you thought about the fruit in front of you and not the fruit ahead of you. You just thought about the here and now and not the then. This is why his whole, do you understand how rational this argument is? Take no part. See, he's talking about practicing and partners. Take no part, because remember, the gospel not only changes our practices, but changes our partners. Take no part in that. But then he says this, here's the positive affirmation, but instead expose them. Now let's chat about this for a second, because I can't just leave you here with this, because if you leave this, you're gonna go home and light up Facebook later. I'm exposing all my former partners. That's what it said to do. No. And this is what amazes me about Christians. It's like almost overnight, they go from being partners of darkness to Pharisees. That is not what this is saying. And can I lovingly say this to you? The Holy Spirit doesn't need you to expose the planet to this person's sin. That's not your job. You wanna know why I know it's not your job? Because you can't take this verse and just use it as a club to beat people with. This verse does not supersede Matthew 18. And what does Matthew 18 say? This is Jesus talking, right? This is the pattern. Matthew 18 says, if your brother, and in context, your brother or sister, sins against you, go to that person. And this is what's crazy, and so many people miss this. You and him alone. And tell them. See, a better way to read this is not expose them, but expose it to them. Because why would it say in verse 11, expose them, and then the very next word, very next verse say, it's shameful to even speak of the things that they do. Well, that seems oxymoronic, right? It's like, tell everybody, but it's shameful to tell everybody. Because that's not what it's saying. In my humble opinion, I think it's saying it's shameful to tell everybody else what they do, but it's good and right to tell them. See, it's not shameful for me to go to my brother or my sister and say, listen, what you're doing, what you're partaking in is not of the light. And I love you enough to come to you face to face and say this to you. See, that's what Jesus said in Matthew 18. You and them alone. So think about it like this. You expose it to the person, not the planet. Because if you're exposing it to the planet, then you're acting like a Pharisee. If you expose it to the person, you're acting like a family. You see the difference? And then Matthew 18 goes on to say, if they don't hear you, it says first, if they do, you've won them. If they don't, then take one or two more with you so that it may be established by 2 or 3 witnesses. Like, hey man, we all see this pattern. You were darkness, but now you're light, but yet you're practicing darkness and you're partnering with people. This is what's so amazing to me. And you could take this to the bank. And those of you who've been around the block, you know what I'm about to say. It's amazing to me that the moment someone wants to start practicing darkness, their people change. You know, we have that phrase, they're my people. They're my people. Well, who's your people? Your people are typically the ones that you want to reinforce your practices. So if you want to practice light, then you're gonna have people, your people are gonna be people of the light. But if you wanna practice darkness, guess what? Your people's gonna change. I see this all the time. People start pulling away from the church because they don't want to act like they're children of light anymore. And then the church, the people of God, when they see that happening, should expose it to them. Go to them one-on-one. Man, I see this in you, and it concerns me because I love you. And if they don't hear you, take 2 or 3. And then the third one, it says, and if they still don't hear you, bring it to the church. But at no time does it say take it any more public than that. Then it says, if they still won't hear you, treat them like Gentiles or tax collectors. What does that mean? It means treat them like they've decided to not be our people anymore. And these are our people. And then Jesus says what is often one of the most misquoted verses in all the Bible. It's interesting, right after that, he says, whatever you bind on earth, bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth, 2 or 3 agree. And then it says, where 2 or more are gathered, I am there with them also. I can't tell you how many times that verse is misquoted by people who are like, we got 2 or 3 people here, Jesus is here. How was it? Oh, it was great, man. We only had 2 or 3, but you know, where 2 or 3 are gathered, Jesus is there. Like that, and I'm not making fun of you, well, I kind of am, but What I'm saying is you're missing the point if that's how you quote it. Because Jesus is there if there's just one person, right? Right? I mean, because Jesus is in you. Like, this is what I don't understand. Like, if it's just me, Jesus ain't there. Two of us, Jesus is there. That's bad maths. No, what is Jesus getting at here? He's saying, when two or three come together in agreement, I'm in that. Because Jesus is into relational reconciliation. That's what he's into. Jesus is into racial reconciliation. That's what he's into. Jesus is saying, I'm into that. I'm not into two or three gathering and gossiping. I'm not in that. And here's what you need to know, and I love you enough to say this. If you are gathering with others and gossiping, you are sending a message. You don't love the person that you're gossiping about. You love, watch this, you love being right more than you love the relationship. And so you are gathering people around you to stroke your feelings of being right. Because if you love the person, you would expose it to them. You wouldn't expose them. Do you see why I had to explain this verse to you? Which is why verse 14, it ends with, therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine upon you. Now, I told you this back in Ephesians 4. This is written in a weird way. This is the last verse. This is written in a weird way because normally when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, it says this, therefore. But this reverses the order and says, don't partner with them. Therefore it says. And so what it sounds like it's saying is the Old Testament was written in light of what the New Testament would say. And you would be correct. It was. Because these are commands. And it's not a reference to one Old Testament verse, it's a reference to several. So Paul is kind of summarizing here. And these are both commands, awake and arise. Think about it. This was written in the Old Testament in light of what God would say in Ephesians 2. You were dead, but he made you alive. See, the God of the Old Testament is just as loving and merciful as the God of the New, and he commanded it in the Old because he knew he was gonna enable it in the New. You can't awake. You can't make yourself alive. You can't arise, but Christ can. Christ can make you awake. He can open your eyes. He can make you alive, and he can raise you up to walk as children of God. See, any command that the Bible tells you, God will enable. This is why when he says, be holy, you're like, I can't be holy, but by grace you can. This is why when God says forgive, and you're like, I can't forgive, by grace you can. This is why when God says awake, I can't wake. This is why when God says arise, I can't. This is why when God says walk, you're like, I can't. But by Christ and grace, you can. See, that's why when we partake of the promise, it changes our practices and our partners because we have a Father and we have a family and we'll have new fruit. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Again, there is no message like the gospel. That commands us to be holy, commands us not to partake, not to partner, commands us to discern and do what you want, not what we want or the father of lies wants. But God, you enable what you command. You make us alive so that we can wake up. you empower us to rise and walk so that we can walk by grace. And so God, I pray for anybody here today listening or watching that has never had that moment where Christ has shined on them and has opened their eyes to see the truth that they are loved by a Father. I pray right now you'd save them. No one looking around or talking here as we close. The invitation is always the same. It's an introduction to my Father through the sacrifice of the Son on the cross. So if you have never had that moment where you have been made alive and have been made a part of a family, it can happen right now. You can pray with me. You don't have to say it out loud because this is ultimately between you and him. And it goes like this. You can say, Father, thank you for loving me, that you sent your Son in my place for my sin to save me, to redeem me. You showed me what I was worth by what you were willing to pay to get me back. So I receive grace. Make me alive together with Christ and empower me to walk as a loved child. Again, nobody looking around or talking here as we close, but if you're in one of our physical locations and you just prayed that with me, we just simply lift your hand up so we can see that. We got men and women that are here gonna put a gift in your hand, and when they do, you can put that down. Thank you. But then those of us that are children of light, we are children of our Father. Again, I'm not saying that we won't struggle, but what I'm saying is we are not darkness anymore. When we partook of that, it changed our practices and it changed our people. So maybe for you today, the invitation is look at your practices and look at your people. Maybe you've been listening to the wrong people. You've been surrounding yourself with the wrong people. And you don't want that to be your future. And so God is changing your people, your practices. But no, as I say often, in this family, we love each other enough to go to each other. This is not a family where we talk about each other. We're not trying to expose each other to others. We're trying to expose things to each other. We are trying to say in love the truth to each other. And that's how this family's built up. Because yes, you do have blind spots. And maybe the only people that love you are those that are pointing them out to you, not those that are encouraging you to keep gossiping in the dark. Father, I pray that we would live as children of the light. We would try to discern and do what is pleasing to you, because what is pleasing to you is what's best for us, because you're a good Father. And I pray that we become the kind of people that would live like that. In Jesus' name, amen. Love you, church.